Quilty is brought to you by Baby Lock Sewing and Long Arm Machines. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Aurifil. Aurifil Italian thread, perfectly suited for all your quilting projects. Fairfield. Together, we can make beautiful things. Free Spirit. A new generation of creative and playful fabrics perfect for fashions, home decor, quilting, crafting, and more. Hovels Sewing. Cut it close with Hovels. Moda. Make something quilty with Moda fabrics. Thermoweb. Manufacturer of heat and bond adhesives and new luxe interfacings, proudly made in the USA. Hi out there, my name's Mary Fons. You are watching Quilty. We're glad to have you back. And Judy Tucker, welcome to the set.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is so cool that you're here. We connected through Facebook, right?
Correct.
But we knew each other before.
Yes.
Chicago Modern Quilt Guild.
Yes.
2012.
It's been
a little while.
It's been that long.
I'm a bad guild member. I haven't been in a while. I'm always out of town.
We miss you.
I know. I want to come back. I do, and maybe you'll be there showing your gorgeous quilts. We have one behind us here.
Yes.
We're going to talk about that one. What do you do here in Chicago when you're not sewing?
I do long arming. I'm
cool.
the owner of Lake House Quilts.
Great.
And I enjoy teaching when I have the opportunities and sharing my love of quilting.
You're in. Welcome to the clubhouse. So today on the show, we're going to talk about bias binding. What is bias binding? What's the difference between that and regular old binding?
Well, bias binding is a binding that allows you to stretch and do curves.
Okay.
But basically, it's the 45-degree angle of a piece of fabric. It's not the straight of grain or the cross grain. But when you go on an angle, it allows you that ease and opportunity to do different things with it.
We're going to cut this piece of fabric here in just a minute, but I want to show, for those of you who don't know those terms or forgot about them, this is straight of grain. When you're cutting along the grain of the fabric, this is straight of grain. It's along the grain of the fabric because fabric is woven, and it's crosswise and lengthwise grain. So when you cut a diagonal, you're interrupting that grain. You're cutting bias. So that makes it very stretchy, because you've compromised the weave of the fabric.
Yes.
So when you need your binding to stretch, you have it.
Right, when you need to go around a curve. Otherwise, the straight just doesn't give you that opportunity, and it doesn't ease in as well.
Right. So this is a perfect example. Lots of those undulating waves, those amber waves of grain. And this is very cute. This is raw edge applique.
Correct. Right? This is an older piece we had fun doing at a retreat. So, but I wanted to put a little curve on the edge, and to that I needed the bias binding.
A lot of times the bias binding is chosen because you want to do the curve complements the quilt itself. So it's a design choice to make bias binding. Yeah.
Correct.
Cool. Okay. And then maybe the best example that we have today is this double example because it shows what happens with a stripe. Bias binding and stripes, it's like peanut butter and chocolate.
Right. Sometimes you will choose bias binding just because of the product you'll get in the end and what it'll do for it. On this one, we had cut the straight of grain.
Right.
So you see the stripe going back and forth. And on this one, it adds a little bit of a twirl, almost like the old barbershop twirl on it.
Absolutely.
And it just gives you a different look.
It's the same fabric. This is cut straight strips. This is cut on the bias, okay? So let's do, and there's one more example. Hang on, there's one more example.
Yes.
Tell me about bias binding in small projects like this.
Well, because to go around a curve like this, you could not use the straight. It just would pucker up and pull your purse, and it just would not lay right. So just by doing the bias binding around that, or a collar, or a bottom of a jacket if it's curved, that really helps.
Cool. Okay, so see lots of applications for bias binding. Now the question is, how do you make it? And that's the important part. And there's so many different ways to do it. We're going to do a couple shows on this. But Judy, I'd like you to show me your method for making bias binding.
Okay, so we have our fabric, and this is the cross and the straight of grain. So these don't stretch well, but you'll know that the bias is on an angle, and it is 45. So the mat isn't always as big as your fabric, so I will at times fold it over. And sometimes if the ruler and mat don't go quite far enough still, I'll fold this little guy back on itself.
That's a great tip. because that keeps all your fabric on your mat.
On your mat.
Yeah.
So your ruler gets front and back.
So now that I need to cut, am I cutting?
You're
I'm
cutting this way from
Okay,
right
right.
to left.
Okay. And am I using the rulers on the lines on the mat to cut, or?
I don't. I always use my ruler.
Okay. So, how, and 2.5 or?
2.5.
Help me set up my cut so I don't slice through the wrong way. Yeah,
slice you.
awesome.
We're gonna slice you.
We're gonna slice me.
Yeah, we're gonna slice
You
you
know,
now.
I've done it before. But never on the show. I've never
And I'll
actually.
faint, so we don't want to do that.
Yeah, don't faint. 2.25, 2.5.
I do both, depending on how much I want hanging over or the
Mm-hmm.
thickness of a quilt.
Okay. Well, I usually go with 2.5 because I can always remember. And then if
Yes.
I have leftover strips, I have leftover strips. Although when you have bias strips, you kind of need to put them in a Ziploc baggie and mark them.
Right. You don't want to pull on them or play with them much because they will stretch out of shape.
They don't behave as the same as like a jelly roll strip, which is cut, with the grain. They're less sturdy. So okay, 2.5. Now I'm going to cut over a little bit,
Okay.
and then come back.
Sometimes I'll do that to clean up my edge and
My
turn
mom
it
does
around.
that. Yeah, my mom does that. So I'm just gonna eyeball it down
Oh,
here.
you're good.
Yeah, well, not too good. Don't look too close. Okay, I cut with commitment there. I'm gonna take that away and then flip it. I didn't used to cut this way, but then you sew enough with your mentors and you sew enough with people, you start picking up their habits.
Yes. It used to be don't turn the fabric. Don't
Yeah,
turn it.
I know. And then
Walk around the table.
right, yeah, exactly. Or have a second cutting mat and turn the mat. That's what I've seen too. Okay, so I've got 2.25. Great. Yeah, this little green stripe, I mean, when it's running diagonal, it'll be really cool.
Right.
Really
It'll give us
cool.
a totally different look.
Okay.
So as you
Great.
open up,
Mhm.
and now you have your diagonal.
It's almost like a different fabric when you
It
look at it
is.
that way, you know?
Mhm. Because if you had bound 2.25 this way, you probably would have missed some of those design elements, don't
Absolutely,
you think?
I think so. So then we take it to our iron, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you do a little bit of that part? Making binding, you always have to watch those fingers because it's like you really
Yes.
get close with your iron to your fingers, no matter how you make binding, bias or otherwise.
Now, sometimes you use the tool.
Mm-hmm. Let me pull that. I'd love to see that. Let's just
Okay.
pull it where the camera can really see it, though. Right here.
If I don't have any tools handy and I'm kind of wanting to go for it, I'll line my edge up here from that, and I'll bring it straight down, and I'll draw my line diagonal. Oops, this little guy needs to flip.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It's
Right
right
side
side
together.
up.
We would have seen that.
Yeah, it wouldn't have
before
looked as
too
pretty.
long. Yeah, right. Great.
And then I just draw a line, and after it's sewn, I have my continuous like that.
And that you need a lot of binding. For a small quilt, you don't need a lot of binding. But
Right.
I make big quilts. You seem to make, bigger quilts. I suppose these are some small projects. But
Yes.
most of the time, you need to do a lot of strips.
Correct.
binding. And is it true that with bias, you have to cut more? You have to join more,
You
don't
do,
you?
because sometimes you're cutting in the middle of your fabric to get that 45-degree angle. You don't want a little binding strip that big to
Right.
feed in.
Right, exactly. So then you join your strips and you keep going, joining. And then once you have that long piece, you press it at the iron. And this is where we
Yes.
can get this pressing action here. And then you've got bias binding. That's pretty much how it goes.
I'm a little cold on your board here.
Yeah, that's
And when I do press, Mary, just for
Yeah,
a little note,
please.
I make sure that I don't pull on my bias binding,
Ah.
especially trying to line up the diagonal with the one on the back.
Mm-hmm.
If you pull on it, it will distort.
It will distort and stretch. Yeah, treat the binding, cut on the bias gently. You really do have to
Like a
treat it
little
gently.
baby.
Do you ever use any starch? A little bit of.
I do.
I do too.
I'm a big starcher.
I am too. I like starch. I belong to the starch family.
Do you?
I do. Some people really just don't like starch, but
thought
I think it's
recognized
wonderful.
that in you.
Yes, we know our own. Judy, thank you. This is great.
Oh,
I think
thank you.
got a good sense of this method for making bias. Keep watching Quilty for all kinds of wonderful quilting instruction and different methods. And if you don't like this method, no problem. You can try your own
Yeah.
and send us your tips for great bias binding. Thanks, Judy.
Thank you, Mary.
See you next time. Quilty is brought to you by Baby Lock Sewing and Long Arm Machines. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Aurifil Italian thread, perfectly suited for all your quilting projects. Fairfield, together we can make beautiful things. Free Spirit, a new generation of creative and playful fabrics perfect for fashions, home decor, quilting, crafting, and more. Hovels Sewing, cut it close with Hovels. Moda, make something quilty with Moda fabrics. Thermoweb, manufacturer of heat and bond adhesives and new luxe interfacings, proudly made in the USA.